I'm Nicola Kefalianos, a Gen Z uni student wanting to get onto the impossible feeling the property ladder. And this is my dad, John. He's a mortgage broker and a property developer.
Thank you, Nicola.
So, I've found my perfect house, I've got my pre-approval, I've signed the papers, gone through the calling off process. What's the next step?
Yeah, very, very important step this is, and that's the process of going from a pre-approved property to a formal approval and then through to settlement and then getting the keys for your new property. So
what is settlement?
So settlement is when the property officially gets transferred into your name. So that's on the day of settlement. So on the day of settlement, your conveyancer or solicitor would arrange for that property to be transferred from the vendor's name into your name. So that's the settlement date. But the settlement period is something we can just touch on quickly. So when you make the offer on the property, you can make the settlement period 30 or 60 days, which is probably the most common. But it's also possible to extend that settlement period longer than that as well. So there might be periods where you might be able to go to a 90-day or a 120-day settlement. But most of the time, it's between 30 and 60 days from when you sign the contract. So settlement date is normally between 30 and 60 days from the time of contract being signed.
So what happens between that settlement period?
So once that contract's signed, the first thing you need to do is get that contract to your conveyancer and also to your finance broker or bank. Because what they'll need to do is arrange a value at the bank. The bank will need to arrange a valuation on that property and then arrange formal approval. So, for example, you might have had a pre-approval for $800,000, but you might have bought a house for $700,000. So you need to adjust your figures accordingly to get the loan formally approved. Once the loan's formally approved, the bank will then issue with loan documents, which you then need to sign with your finance broker as well.
Yep.
They then go back to the bank for certification, and the bank then arrange settlement with your conveyancer or solicitor. So once that's all been done, the bank and the conveyancer will arrange a time to meet, which is all done electronically through a system called PEXA.
Oh no, that's different.
And they arrange for all the documentation gets done for that property to be transferred into your name. So do you have any questions about that settlement process, Nicola?
So as a finance broker, do you see any purchases fall through at the settlement process?
Fortunately, we don't, because we like to work with our buyers right from the start and make sure they follow the process and they understand the process of knowing what their limits are, getting a pre-approval in place, making the right conditions on the contract, and making sure they're covered as well. So what we try to do is make sure we position people in a way that when they do sign a contract, that is going to be going ahead. So in our situation, we don't, but it is something that does happen. And I often do get deals come to me where someone might have gone to a bank specifically rather than a broker. The deal's fallen over and they come to us to try to save the deal.
And then that's
where, well, not easily, not in all situations, but that's where there's a benefit of using a finance broker who's got a range of banks they can work with rather than just one bank. So I often get referrals from real estate and say, John, I've had a deal fall over. Can you help this client out? Yeah. Settlement's in 20 days' time and we're stuck. So that actually happens a fair bit. But that's where that buyer hasn't done their research properly from the start and followed the process, which is getting a pre-approval, knowing their limits, and setting and basically making an offer on a property that has got conditions that allows them to get out.
As well as the bank not doing their due diligence right from the beginning.
Correct.
Because they've only got access to their bank.
Well, what happens with banks is they sometimes, if you go to the branch, they sometimes just give you a high-level pre-approval without actually analysing your situation. So things sometimes come out later on when you do deal with the bank where they might not have, there might be something that you didn't tell them, but they didn't ask you either. That's where a deal might fall over.
So that's where a finance broker crosses all.
A good finance broker will go through your situation in detail and make sure that when they do submit a deal, that will be approved.
So you were talking a bit about conveyancers and solicitors.
So a conveyancer or a solicitor would work with you to arrange for that property to be transferred into your name. Okay. So the way they do that, first of all, they have to identify you, make sure that you are who you are. They have to then liaise with the bank to make sure that once that loan's approved, they book in settlement with the bank and they coordinate the settlement date to arrange that transfer. So what they do, they arrange the money to come from the bank, your deposit to come from you, and then arrange for that money to be transferred to the vendor. So then basically at settlement, your money goes to the vendor, you pay for that property, and it gets transferred to your name. So in summary, the role of the conveyancer or solicitor is to arrange your money, which is from your bank and from you, and transfer that to the vendor
Okay.
and the vendor's bank, which then
They arrange the property.
takes their name off the title. So it takes their name off the title.
And put my name
and
on
put
the
your
title.
name on the title. So then you take ownership of that property.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically handle that process of the transaction. The other thing that they do, which is very important, is that when you do buy a property, there's other fees involved as well. For example, let's just say you're buying a property and the house you're buying, that vendor has paid council rates for the whole year, and we're only 2 months into that financial year.
Okay.
You've got to then reimburse
The vendor
for those council rates. So they run calculations on SA Water, council rates, emergency services levies, etc. So the conveyancer arranges for everything to be cut off from the day of settlement from the previous vendor and then transferred into your name.
Okay. And all reimbursements to be made.
Correct, yep.
So how much does a conveyancer or a solicitor actually cost?
Depending on which state you're in, it can be anywhere from $1,000 up to $3,000.
Wow, that's a big difference.
But generally around $1,000 to $1,500 in most states. So the other thing that you've got to be aware of when you are buying a property is that you're going to have a few things in place before settlement, and sometimes before settlement as well. For example, insurance in the property. Insurance in the property, you need to try to have arranged from when you are unconditional on that contract. So getting insurance on that property in your name is important.
Yep.
The other thing, on the day of settlement, things like electricity, gas, water aren't automatically going to be in your name. You actually have to arrange for those to be transferred yourself. So you can either ring up each utility and arrange for that to be connected yourself, but there are also third-party services, which the real estate agent you're dealing with should know, which can arrange for those things to be transferred into your name.
So how and when do I get my keys for the house?
So what happens, settlement date is booked, and let's just say it's a Thursday, and settlement can happen anytime from 12 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we don't actually know what time.
Why so specific?
It's normally in the afternoon it happens. So because banks and conveyancers have a number of properties they're settling, it's arranged. It can't happen at a specific time. So it's got to be booked in.
Okay.
And it can happen any time between 11 and 4 o'clock. So you don't know what time settlement actually is, probably until the day of settlement. Okay. So you normally don't get the keys until later on that day, and that's where you have to work with your real estate agent to arrange for those keys to be able to get your keys for your new property. What you have to be aware of is it's very hard to move into your property on the day of settlement, because you've got to remember that when the house that you're buying, someone is also moving out of that property on that same day normally.
Okay, so that's the last day they're allowed to be out.
Correct.
So they don't even have to be out like a week before, say.
No, they've got until that day to be out of that property. So you normally would arrange settlement, or you would arrange to move into that property at least one day after settlement day. So what I've heard that has happened with some people through some real estate agents is that people arrange to move in on the same day as settlement.
Okay, and that doesn't always work?
It doesn't always work, because we don't know what time settlement's going to happen, and there might be some delays as well. So, for example, you might have moved all your things out of your property. You've got a removalist truck to move stuff into your new property, and the removalist truck sitting there in your driveway waiting for the keys. So you're waiting for you to open up the house, but you might not be able to do that
because there's still people moving out.
So let's just say now you've moved out of your house at let's say you're buying and selling. You've moved out of your house at 10 o'clock in the morning. You've got all your stuff in a truck. You go to your new property, you're waiting for the keys. It might not be until 4 o'clock that you get those keys. So those removalists then have to work late at night to unload that truck. So there's a lot of frustration.
And then you're paying.
Can happen. You're also paying a lot of extra money as well. So it's very hard to arrange same-day settlements.
So it should be at least a couple of days after, because of course you would want to get it all
correct.
Cleaned and things.
Yep. Something else to be aware of in some states is they have pre-settlement inspections. So that's to make sure that what you're buying and what you've thought you were buying and what's on the contract
is still the same.
Is still the same at the time of settlement. So you can arrange access to the property before settlement to make sure, for example, in the contract it might say keep all the curtains. They might have removed the curtains. So you can do your pre-settlement inspection to make sure everything that you're expecting is how it is on the day of settlement. Correct.
So settlement seems like a pretty straightforward process, but can there be delays?
Yeah, there definitely can be. And that can be from both sides. So let's start off from your side as a purchaser. So you're buying this property.
Yep.
Things are out of your control a little bit, but you've got to control them as much as possible through your finance broker and your conveyancer. So let's just say, for example, now you've signed loan documents, they've gone back to the bank, and there's a delay in the bank arranging the settlement date and being ready for settlement. And that could be because the bank might be too busy, and there's, instead of being 24-hour turnaround time for loan documents to be certified, it might be 5 days, which does happen when banks do get very busy. So let's just say there's a delay on your side and you delay settlement, and settlement was meant to be today and it's not now going to settle until
4 days, say.
3 days' time. So in the contract, in some contracts what it says is that for every day that you delay settlement, there'll be a charge of 10% on the purchase price, charged daily.
To the vendor?
To the purchaser. And also to the vendor. So this is, we're talking about now you're delaying settlement.
Yep, so I will be paying to the vendor.
Yep, so let's just say you're purchasing a property for $700,000, and on the contract it states that if you delay settlement, you're going to get charged a daily rate of 10% on the purchase price. So what that means is 7%, so 10% on $700,000 is $70,000. Divide by 365 is around $180 to $190 per day that you're going to get charged. So if you're going to get, if you delay settlement by 3 days, the vendor can charge you 3 times $180 to $190. So that gets taken out at settlement.
Payment to the vendor.
On the other side, which is interesting as well. So let's just say the vendor delays settlement, and that could be because a number of reasons. It could be that they're buying another property that isn't ready for them to move into yet, or it could be that they've got to pay out their loan.
Or discharge fees.
And discharge their mortgage. Say their bank's delayed things. If their bank's delayed things and then you want to be moving into that property and they've delayed settlement, there's also a fee that you can charge them.
Is that the same fee?
It's very similar. It depends on the contract and where you are. It might have a bit more of a leeway where they might give 3 days grace in case things go wrong. So they might not start charging the fee for another 3 days. But theoretically, you can charge them a fee for delaying settlement.
So as many days as, say, the vendor or the purchaser has delayed the settlement process, that payment is given to each side.
Correct, yep. And it's calculated at settlement day. So in summary from today's episode, Nicola, I think it's important to note what the conveyancer and solicitor do. So the conveyancer and solicitor arrange for the transfer of the property from the vendor's name into your name.
Yeah.
There is a process that goes behind that, which is got to do with your bank and your approval. But that's the role of the conveyancer and the
changing titles.
solicitor is to change the name of the title, and all the services, things like utilities, like electricity, water, gas, you'll need to arrange yourself. So the conveyancer arranges the title to be transferred to your name and the loan's in your name.
So I don't want to be moving into my first property with there being no electricity when I'm walking in or no hot water when I'm having a shower.
Correct. So that's something that you need to arrange in that settlement.
So my biggest takeaway from this episode is that you must be very organised with this process and make sure everything's in place, especially your finances. So then there's no delays. Otherwise, that will cost me as a first home buyer a lot of money.
Correct. Yep. So follow the process of having a pre-approval, again, setting your limit, know the budget on the property you're buying, have some clauses or know what your calling off rights are, getting your loan formally approved, and then working with your conveyancer and solicitor to arrange that settlement.
So guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Settlement might not be the funnest part of the process, but once we get our keys on that big day, that's when the fun really begins. But we have to make sure that everything's in order so we can actually get those keys and not pay any penalties. So make sure you've got a great conveyancer on your team and a great mortgage broker so settlement can be as smooth as possible. I'm Nicola Kefalianos. Happy house hunting.